So, guys, I just really quickly the question about Y tubes, Y connectors. I wanted to show you just a few things really quick on the front of this. This is a Y connector for a feeding tube. You see how it's just got a little extra plug here? So this is your feeding tube. Your feeding tube would connect here to the patient and here to the bag of feeding supply, or it would be capped off if you were bolus feeding. And here is a little syringe port. So if someone is getting a feeding, tube feeding, we can come in and give them medicine through this little port right here and not interrupt their feeding. So there's a little port for it, and there can be capped off. It's a little one for this, and it can be capped off. So that's a Y port. Then there's a T connector, and this goes into, like, if the person has a IV in their hand that is an angiocath of some kind. It's not very long. I mean, the hub sticks out of the skin, and there's nothing past the hub. Rather than hook IV tubing directly to that, it's a good idea to use an extension set. So we use an extension set. It makes it easier to manipulate the tubing, to interrupt and give medicines, whatever we need to do, change tubing even. So this is a T connector. This would go into the patient's angiocath. We could give medicines here then, or this goes and will go to the IV bag. We can also heparin lock right here and then just give medicines right here too, rather than manipulate the hub of the IV itself and risk dislodging the angiocath. Then there's a Y connector that looks like this. You see how this end is different? This is for something like oxygen. Um, I'm trying to think, for some reason, a catheter. You might need two tubes. Typically not a sterile thing, and certainly not locked to prevent dislodgement per se. You see that? The larger oxygen tubing or something would go on top of that. Okay. Now, this is the item that you ask about, and it is the Y connector, and you can see just why they call it that. Here's the Y. See, both of these, this would go attached to the patient's angiocath right at their hand, much like that T connector does. It just gives you a little extra tubing to play with. And if I want to give two medications, then I've got two different ports to do that. Now, as soon as this hits the vein, which will be about right here, somewhere at the end of that angiocath, it's going to mix. So you aren't really doing a whole lot in terms of separating it. But we can give one in this, flush very well between, heparin lock, and like I say, not give them both at the same time in that regard. And that gives it time to move on past the end of the needle and out into the circulation. So, but this is a Y connector. These have the safety caps on them that a syringe screws onto. They may have just a what I call an orange top, but just an injection port right here, an injection cap on both. Either way, you have two different sources, two different accesses to give medicine in that IV. This is what we call a pigtail. It's like the T connector, it just doesn't make a T. This goes into the patient's hand. This goes into not the patient's hand, but the angiocath in the patient's hand. And then it's just a little bit of extra tubing with an injection site here. We can hook up IVs to this. We can do pushes here. It's much easier to manipulate this pigtail than it is to manipulate right here at the side of the IV with just a tiny little bit of no tubing and just a hub sticking out of their hand. So that's all I was going to do. I'll put these on the front of the cancer slides, but I am going to remove them to a different place. So I just wanted to make that distinction between those things, and so that you could see what a Y connector was. I hope that that kind of answers your question. One thing about you ask about, could medications be given differently if a person is taking a PO medication and they interact, potentially they could be distanced. One could be taken 2 hours before the other one or 4 hours after the other one, depending on timing, depending on that half-life. and depending on what type of interaction there was. Potentially, though, they should not get both if there's any other alternative. Given IV, things could be separated via IV. It just really is going to depend on the medications and what the interaction is. So, okay, that's all I have. Thanks, guys.